If you need to leave during the presentation, please feel free to discreetly slip out. If you are a student here for a class, thanks for being here. Please make sure to sign in on the sheet that is circulating. There is also a sign-in sheet at the welcome table. Also, for those of you who might not have these on your chairs, I would encourage you to check out the welcoming table on your way out. And Mr. Paul Wright's provided these for us. Please pick up your copy of Prison Legal News on your way out. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, who we're very excited to have here with us, Mr. Paul Wright. While serving 17 years in the Washington State Reformatory, Paul Wright started Prison Legal News, a publication dedicated to prisoners' rights. Now, he's co-edited a book, Prison Profiteers, that exposes those making money at the expense of the nation's 2.3 million prisoners. As the editor of Prison Legal News, Paul Wright is responsible for the content of the monthly magazine and PLN's website. He is also the executive director of the Human Rights Defense Center, of which Prison Legal News is a project. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Paul Wright.
Hi, I'd like to thank everyone for showing up to come hear what I have to say today. Unfortunately, my time is short in the sense that I'm not going to be able to hang around because I have a plane to catch at 2. I found that I've been here to Champaign before, and I'd forgotten that it's kind of a hard place to get out of. So anyways, I'm going to leave it open for Q&A after probably around 20 or 25 minutes. So if you've got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them then. One of the things I try to do is I think, especially when there's an ongoing series on criminal justice issues where other people are talking and touching on kind of similar issues, I try to kind of have a different take on stuff because I think that all too often you hear about the same stuff. And what I want to talk about today is about prisons, power, and policy. And one of the things you hear a lot of criminal justice reform activists say is that the prison system doesn't work or the criminal justice system doesn't work. And that's simply not true. It works extremely well. And the bigger question is who benefits from it and who doesn't. And right now, today, on any given day, there's around 2.5 million people that are locked up in American prisons. That number is probably a little conservative because I'm not really sure. I don't think it counts, for example, people that have been civilly committed, people that are held in immigration prisons, military prisons, juvenile prisons. We got a pretty big gulag in this country. Then we got 7 or 8 million people that are under so-called correctional supervision, which is the nice term for parole, probation, supervised release, or basically the short leash in the bigger cage that leads to the smaller cage. And prisons are a tool of social control, and in this country they're used to contain the poorer classes. Prisons, regardless of race, the people that are locked up in this country are almost uniformly poor. That's one of the things they share across lines is their poverty. At any given time before they were incarcerated, between 80 and 85% of the people were unemployed or making less than $10,000 a year in the year before their incarceration. Criminologist Celia Curry once said that mass incarceration is the most thoroughly implemented social experiment in American history, and I think he's probably right. With 5% of the world's population, the United States has 25% of the world's prisoners, and both in terms of real numbers and percentage of the population, when you start thinking about it, the United States has more prisoners than countries like China that have 3 or 4 times the population. And then you think about it in historical terms. Some people deride Stalin's Russia in the 1930s, both in terms of raw numbers and percentages of numbers. The United States has more people in prisons or correctional supervision, which I guess the Soviet equivalent would have been internal exile. The numbers are bigger today than they were in Stalin's Russia. So I think this is one of those things where when we talk about success and failure, the system has been an overriding success. And one of the things that we have that's mass incarceration has brought to the United States is it's been very successful to bring about social stability. The United States has not seen any mass uprising since the Rodney King riots of 1992. Even as you see wealth widening and expanding, the rich get richer and the poor get prison, as someone else once put it. And the American prison system and the police state has brought a huge amount of social stability to the United States. As European leaders impose austerity measures on their populations, they have to worry about the prime ministers of Rome in Italy and Greece have to worry if their cities are going to burn if they push their populations too far. The American ruling class has no such concerns. And I think these are the tributes to the American prison system and how successful it's been in containing social dissent. We also see the constriction of political space. Any type of dissent is met with a full-blown counterinsurgency response. And sure, you have a right to free speech as long as you don't exercise it. We also have the creation of criminality in this country. And the war on poor drug use, I'm not really going to touch on that because I think plenty of other people talk about the war on drugs or the war on poor drug users, which, I don't think we've ever seen any rich people going to prison for possession of drugs or their use of drugs, and it's not because they don't use them. Like Charlie Sheen, I think, is the most famous probationer in America, and no one's revoking his probation. When we talk about the creation of criminality, I think that's one of the things that sets the United States apart is, we're not really seeing, it's not that Americans are more criminal than other countries or that we're more prone to breaking the laws, it's just that in part, we have more laws to break. Looking around the room, I see there's older people here. And I think, some of us can remember when being a sex offender per se wasn't an offense that required registration. When you start creating criminality and passing new laws for more people to break, you're going to get a bigger prison population. One of the things that we've seen at the Human Rights Defense Center, we sue a lot of jails because they ban books and magazines. And one of the things I find interesting is we're suing jails in 300, 400, 500 bed jails, and 50 or 60% of the jail population is incarcerated because they can't pay child support. It's not because they've broken a law, it's not because they've accused of being a criminal or whatever, they just can't pay the child support, so they're being locked up in a cage because they can't pay. Some of the ways that prisons impact the American economy, I think, in beneficial ways for those who control our economy is the impact on labor markets. You think about the 2.5 million people that are locked up. Well, you know what? They're not working. They're not in the labor market. If those 2.5 million people weren't in a cage, what would they be doing? In a post-industrial economy, this represents the surplus labor force of America, the people who can or won't be employed. And when we talk about high unemployment rates, there's 8 or 9% of the American population is supposedly looking for work, and I want to get into the accuracy of the American employment statistics and how those are manipulated or played with or whatever. But let's just accept them at face value. If those 2.5 million people were counted, American unemployment numbers would look a lot like European unemployment numbers. They'd be in the double digits and they'd have been there for a long time. Then we also have to think about, the Keynesian impact of prisons as a vast jobs program. We have 2.5 million people locked up on any given day, and we've also got 1 million people that are directly employed watching over and guarding those 2.5 million people. These are the prison guards, the secretaries, the wardens, the prison doctors, everyone who draws a paycheck directly related to mass incarceration. And a lot of places those paychecks are pretty good. Here in Illinois, being a prison guard is a pretty good job. It's a middle-class job with great benefits that, most of the rest of us can only dream about. Like, how many of us are going to get a pension? Of course, if you work for a university, that's another great job too. So, and this doesn't actually count the rest of the American police state. This isn't counting the cops, the prosecutors, the judges, which, when you look at local county spending, in most counties around the country, especially the bigger ones, 50, 60, 65% of the county budget is spent directly on police state functions, which is running the jail, running the court system, and running the police department. I mean, that's where the tax dollars go. And this has a huge impact on the economy because, again, we have 2.5 million people locked up who aren't working, 1 million people who, if they weren't working as prison guards or directly related to the carceral machine, what would they be doing? This is a pretty good jobs program. Then we have to talk about wealth transfer, the transfer of public wealth in the form of our tax dollars into private hands and the privatization of our wealth. Since 1980, almost $1 trillion has been spent to build new prisons and jails in this country. That's $1 trillion. That's a lot of money. And the bond traders have been among the beneficiaries of this. They're the first ones that start off making the money. And I think, as you've seen here in Illinois, you build prisons like Thompsonville, and the bonds are still being paid even if the prison is sitting there empty because they don't have the operating funds to run it.